It was a bitterly cold evening during an uncharacteristically cold winter in Lucerne, Switzerland. My doorbell rang just after 6. 2 Swiss women stood outside the door wearing dark coats that resembled uniforms. Though the women looked vaguely familiar, I couldn't place them, but they knew me. "Frau Hipkins," one of them said. From her tone and their serious expressions, I knew this was not a friendly visit. And I remember I was caught by surprise, though I knew I shouldn't have been. I should not have been surprised, because we had been warned. 4 years earlier, in 1992, when my husband and I first moved to Switzerland with our 7-week-old daughter, we marveled at the beauty and order. The soaring mountains and stunning lakes, perfectly groomed flowers and carved window boxes, streets clean enough to eat off of, and a transportation system that was so efficient you could set your watch down to the second by the arrival and departure of the trains. Oh, and the cheese and the chocolate. It was awe-inspiring, but it was also clear from the start that beauty and order came at a price, and everything in Switzerland was expensive. Our permits to live and work in the country, issued by the Fremdenpolizei, or foreign police, could be withdrawn at any time. And we learned the Fremdenpolizei had a file on us, well, more like a binder, that held not only our permit applications, but the lease for our home, our employment contracts, information on our bank accounts, insurance policies, flights in and out of the country. When we received a flurry of 7 or 8 speeding tickets at the end of our first month, before realizing that the large gray boxes placed strategically around town that kept flashing at us were roadside cameras, we knew this too would go into our binder. And the Fremdenpolizei weren't the only ones tasked with keeping order. Early on, I asked one of my husband's Swiss colleagues why other diners stared at us when we were out to dinner with our baby. He explained the Swiss consider it inappropriate to take a child to a restaurant before they can sit on their own. And then he added with an awkward little laugh, and there's a little policeman in every Swiss citizen. He was not kidding. Every time I stopped at a traffic light, other drivers frowned at me, making a strange twisting hand gesture, which I learned meant I was supposed to turn off my ignition. There was a slightly different gesture to indicate when my headlights should be on or off. A man in a dark suit once stopped mid-stride to berate me for feeding ducks from a bridge. Feeding ducks from the shoreline was okay, he said, even commendable. But from a bridge? Absolutely not. Congregating waterfowl presented a risk to boat traffic, he explained, as if to a child. Feeding ducks from a bridge was forbidden. Or, as the Swiss would say, verboten. We quickly came to understand that the Swiss view the concept of free will with significant skepticism. Bad ideas and good ideas were codified into rules or conventions, leaving many activities of daily life either verboten or obligatorisch. Greeting each passerby with the correct form of grüezi, depending on age, social position, and number in your party, obligatorisch. Bagging your own groceries in a timely fashion so as not to inconvenience the cashier, obligatorisch. Sorting one's own recycling at designated recycling centers, green glass, brown glass, white glass, various grades of paper, plastic 1, 2, and 5, obligatorisch. But also verboten on Sundays or holidays. Something I didn't realize until I received the equivalent of a $250 fine for errant holiday recycling. 1 year in, my husband left a small bag of trash on top of an overly full receptacle in the train station. And within 2 hours, authorities had rifled through the bag, found evidence of his name, tracked his employment status, and contacted his company's HR department, who'd called him onto the mat. All within 2 hours. 2 hours. Because leaving trash on top of a receptacle was verboten. Also verboten, mowing your lawn on a Sunday, or if you lived in an apartment building, running a bath or standing up to pee after 10 p.m. because of the noise. We heard stories about people leaving a party at 10:55 p.m. and calling the police at 11 to complain about the noise of the party they'd just left. Babies were zipped into their beds to prevent rolling onto their stomachs, and small children were often harnessed on leashes. And we grew accustomed to all of it, sort of, until that bitterly cold night in the winter of '95, when I received the visit from the 2 Swiss women. Frau Hipkins, the taller of the 2 women, began before going on in German, "We're here about your dog." "Casey?" I said. Casey was our golden retriever puppy, an adorable 9-month-old bundle of energy. "Ja," the tall woman went on. "We have concern for Casey." As she began expounding upon the Swiss Kennel Club standards for golden retrievers, recognition dawned. The women were from the local pet store, the place I purchased Casey's food, his overpriced bed and toys. Space requirements, she was saying, or at least that's what I translated Platzenvordrungen to mean as she tried to peer around me into our home before going on about the need for dogs like Casey to have time off leash, to socialize, to frolic. Neighbors had noticed, she said, that I did not allow Casey off leash to play with the other dogs, to frolic. My mind was playing catch up. At the time, my husband was traveling extensively for work, and I was at home on my own with my daughter, now 4, a son aged 2, Casey the golden retriever puppy, and walking pneumonia. Battling a persistent fever of 102, I'd come up with this elaborate plan to deal with the puppy's outdoor needs. In addition to bundling everyone in layers to take Casey out for a short walk mid-morning and mid-afternoon, I set an alarm at 5:45 a.m. in order to walk him before the kids awoke, and rallied again to walk him after they were in bed. Worried this wasn't enough, I'd also engaged 2 teenage girls to take Casey for an hour-long walk during their lunch break from school. But the tall pet store lady was right. I didn't let Casey run off leash because we lived on a lake, and retrievers are water dogs. When allowed off leash, Casey went straight for the water. I tried in my broken German to explain that while I appreciated Casey's need for socialization and frolicking, I could not let Casey go off leash because I would have to leave my children unattended while retrieving my retriever. I did not put my children on a leash, so there was a danger they might wander into the icy lake, which was a risk I could not take. As I talked, cold air hit the back of my throat, and I began to cough up a lung. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said. "I have walking pneumonia." "Ja," the tall woman said. "We were sorry to hear about the pneumonia." I heard a tinge of pity in her voice, but then it occurred to me, she already knew about the pneumonia? And the pity was fleeting. Herr Hipkins was well. Could he not walk the dog when he returned home for lunch? "Herr Hipkins is traveling for work," I explained, beginning to wonder why I was explaining anything to the 2 ladies from the pet store. "That is why I hired some young girls to walk Casey midday." "Ja, we know about the girls," she said sternly before telling me the Swiss Kennel Club did not recommend hiring strangers to walk a puppy. It was essential for young dogs to have clear boundaries about established order in the home. "Order is important," she said. "You are the alpha dog. You must walk the dog." "But I did walk the dog," I said. "I took Casey on 4 walks a day." At this point, the 2 women exchanged glances, and the shorter one pulled out a notebook. The 4 walks, the tall woman said, were unacceptable. Excuse me, I said. She went on. These 4 walks were too short for a dog of Casey's size and age. In particular, my early morning and evening walks were far too short. She nodded at her companion. One of my morning walks was measured at 6 minutes 32 seconds, the short woman said, reading from the notebook, and another at 7 minutes 13 seconds. One of my evening walks, she said, measured by another source, was a mere 5 minutes 43 seconds. Did I need her to go on? Thinking, please don't. I shook my head and shuddered. To this day, I could not say whether the shudder was from standing in an open doorway on a bone-chilling cold winter night with pneumonia, or the fever that suddenly raged through me as I began to comprehend my neighbors were watching me so closely they could time my walks down to the second. They were watching me while simultaneously watching the train set second-hand sweep across their Swiss watches. We lived in a house below an apartment building, and I could picture them, my neighbors, the ones I dutifully greeted with proper grüezis every time we crossed paths, timing me. Did they call out to each other? Helga, she's leaving! Start your watch! Did they assign each other days? Helga and Klaus on Mondays and Wednesdays, Trudy on Tuesdays and Saturdays, Marcus and Tina the rest of the week? Did they get together to discuss my inadequacy as an alpha dog? Or Casey's lack of frolicking? When did they go to the pet store to report all of this? What else were they reporting? And to whom? The Fremdenpolizei? I don't remember how the conversation ended. What I do remember was thinking, I have to get out of this fucking country. Following rules was one thing. Having my neighbors watch me, discuss me, report me, this was something else entirely. But I couldn't leave. My husband's job was in Switzerland. The next weekend, I took Casey for a long midday walk alone. My husband was home with the kids. I ran into one of my neighbors. Grüezi wohl, I said, pinning on a smile. Grüezi wohl, Frau Hipkins. So good to see you out and about, she said in German. You must be feeling better. Yes, I said, and my husband is home with the kids. Ja, genau, she said. We watched him assemble the new grill on the porch. You must be looking forward to the warm weather. Casey, too, must be looking forward to longer time in the sun. I simply nodded. I knew she meant well. But by the time summer arrived, Casey no longer lived with us. I could not leave the country, but I also could not abide the idea of my neighbors watching me so closely. And accurately or not, I attributed this heightened surveillance to Casey. So we'd found another home for him on a nearby farm, with flowers in boxes, 2 other dogs, and plenty of time and space to frolic off-leash. Perhaps he was the lucky one. Because we lived in Switzerland for years after that visit from the pet store ladies, I became an expert bagger, recycler, and grützier who turned off her engine at red lights. Yet nearly every time I left my house, I'd catch myself looking up at the windows of my neighbors, wondering.
And that was Anastasia Hipkins.